Why do some people seem destined to win before the game even begins? You work hard. You try to do the right thing. Yet you look around and notice a cruel imbalance. Those who have wealth don't just possess money, they possess time, influence, connections, and the quiet freedom to shape reality. Meanwhile, the rest of us are told to be grateful for scraps, to believe that merit and perseverance are enough. Deep down, we can feel that something is off, that the rules weren't written for us, but for them. This is not a new problem. In the 4th century BCE, Aristotle observed that society naturally tends to split into two forces, the many who struggle and the few who rule. He warned that when the rich control the laws and define what justice means, they will always preserve their position because they believe wealth is proof of virtue, and they design a world where that illusion appears true. We like to believe we live in a meritocracy, but look closer and you realize it's more like an invisible aristocracy, one that cloaks itself in modern language. Smart investments, networking, being in the right place at the right time. The outcome is the same. The rich keep winning, not just because of their talent or effort, but because the system reinforces their victory. By the end, you may not be a millionaire, but you'll never look at wealth, power, or your own agency the same way again. This video is not merely a critique of capitalism or greed. It's an exploration of power, how wealth shapes our environment, our psychology, and even our understanding of morality. Throughout this journey, we'll uncover 6 core insights drawn from philosophy, psychology, and real-world structures that might help you not only recognize the game being played, but start thinking like someone who can bend its rules. You may have heard stories of ordinary students working late into the night, perfecting essays, juggling part-time jobs, hoping to get into a good university, believing this will open the doors to a better life. Then one day, you scroll through the news and see a headline: a wealthy businessman donated a new building to an Ivy League school, and his child, whose grades were average at best, was accepted without question. No one calls it corruption. They call it philanthropy. This isn't just about college. It's a mirror of how society is structured. Laws, tax codes, educational meritocracy, all dressed up as fair and neutral. But look closer and you realize the people in power are the architects of these rules. They define what counts as legitimate, legal, respectable, and they carve exceptions for themselves in plain sight. The system applauds them for it. The game is at a fair because those who made the rules still control them. And here's the brutal truth. By the time most of us realize the rules are uneven, we've already internalized the message that it's our fault we're behind. We didn't work hard enough. We didn't manage our money wisely. The system, like a quiet puppeteer, convinces us that fairness exists as long as we don't look too closely. Aristotle, writing over 2,000 years ago, understood this dynamic clearly. He observed that governments tend to serve the interests of whichever class holds the most power. In an oligarchy, laws are crafted in favor of the wealthy. In a democracy, they might tilt toward the majority. But even in those systems, the wealthy find ways to influence the mechanisms behind the scenes. Aristotle warned that when the rich mistake their fortune for moral superiority, they reshape justice itself. Look at modern tax loopholes. A middle-class employee is taxed directly on every paycheck. Meanwhile, a billionaire's wealth is often tied up in assets, investments, shell companies. They can legally avoid taxes most people can't escape. They're not necessarily smarter, just positioned differently within a machine they had the luxury to design. But when we do look closely, we see something staggering. Those who benefit the most from the system are the ones allowed to tweak it anytime it threatens their comfort. If a law hurts their profits, they lobby. If a policy limits their advantage, they find a loophole or pay to create one. It's not a conspiracy in a dark room. It's a polished process held in broad daylight with polite smiles and legal teams. This leads to a slow erosion of trust. People believe in hard work, but the results rarely match. They believe in justice, but the scales lean heavily. A quiet despair forms, or worse, a numb acceptance that this is just how it is. And that's exactly what those in power hope for, a population too tired to question, too busy surviving to resist. Aristotle believed a society thrives only when power is balanced with virtue, when laws serve the common good, not just the elite. But he also reminded us that the powerful will always try to mold virtue to fit their own image. So the first step in reclaiming any real agency is to see this plainly. The game is not neutral. And once you see it, the question becomes unavoidable. If they wrote the rules to serve themselves, are you still willing to play by them? Or will you finally start seeing the board for what it is and begin learning how to move differently? Wealth creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of confidence and influence. Bore to you, social and cultural capital. Imagine two people entering the same boardroom. One arrives in a modest suit, holding a notebook, slightly unsure where to sit. The other strolls in without hesitation, wearing an expensive watch, making effortless small talk with executives, greeting people by first name. You notice it immediately. The room orients itself around the second person. Heads turn. Even before a single word is spoken, authority is assigned. Respect is unconsciously given. Why? Not because they've proven anything, but because wealth gives off a kind of invisible signal the rest of us have been trained to obey. Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, called this cultural and social capital, invisible forms of power that manifest through confidence, accent, mannerisms, networks, and taste. The wealthy don't just own things, they carry themselves a certain way, speak a certain way, and inhabit spaces as if they belong there. That behavior in turn causes others to believe they do belong there, which reinforces the original confidence. It becomes a loop. Wealth creates confidence. Confidence creates influence. Influence then creates more wealth. In contrast, those who grow up without that capital often carry a subtle hesitation, a fear of being found out, of not fitting into the codes of an exclusive environment. Even if you have the skills, you might second-guess your voice. You'll speak more softly, defer more quickly, apologize for your presence. People read that energy and unconsciously rank you lower, not realizing that their perception has nothing to do with your actual ability, and everything to do with how society teaches us to respond to symbols of wealth. Bourdieu argued that this is one of the most powerful ways inequality persists, by training us to internalize our social position and play it out even when external barriers are removed. The elite private schools, the confidence coaching, the polished manners, the ability to speak boldly at a dinner table. These are taught from childhood, not through explicit lessons, but by immersion in an environment that constantly says, you belong at the center, you are meant to be heard. The psychological advantage, becomes a weapon in the real world. Investors are more likely to trust someone who projects certainty. Employers are more willing to take risks on someone who looks like leadership. Voters are drawn to candidates who speak with the effortless swagger of upper-class certainty. It's not just money that opens doors, it's the confidence and cultural fluency that money breeds. Here's the tragedy. Many people mistake that confidence for competence. They believe the wealthy are inherently more capable because they behave as if they're entitled to success. But entitlement can mimic competence so convincingly that we reward it, while dismissing those who hesitate as not leadership material. The result, a cycle where those who already have power accumulate more of it simply by projecting the image of power. You may have noticed this in your own life, a time when you remained silent in a meeting even though your idea was strong, because something inside you questioned whether it was your place. Or maybe you've watched someone else speak with reckless certainty and receive praise simply because they owned the room. That's not always talent. That's performance, and the wealthy have rehearsed it since birth. But once you see this pattern, something shifts. You stop confusing confidence with truth. You stop shrinking yourself just because you weren't handed that armor, and you begin to realize that developing your own presence deliberately, consciously, isn't arrogance. It's reclaiming your right to be heard. The moment you internalize that the wealthy are often just people trained to feel superior, you stop waiting for permission and you start practicing your own voice. Morality bends in favor of the wealthy, and we start to blame the poor. So the question becomes, if influence is partly a performance, what new role can you begin to step into even before the world validates you financially? Have you noticed how society praises a billionaire for giving back a tiny fraction of their fortune while shaming a single mother for using food stamps? A man who hoards millions is called a self-made genius, but a worker who can't afford rent is labeled lazy. We call it charity when the rich throw crumbs, but we call it theft when the poor simply try to survive. Nietzsche and moral illusion. This isn't just hypocrisy. It's a moral system engineered in plain sight. Nietzsche warned us of this in On the Genealogy of Morals. Morality is rarely about goodness. It's about power preserving itself. Those who control the resources redefine virtue to justify their dominance, and over time, everyone else internalizes it. In modern society, the wealthy are framed as morally superior, more disciplined, more deserving, better with money. Their greed becomes ambition. Their exploitation becomes job creation. Their tax evasion becomes smart strategy. Meanwhile, a poor person who takes a day off is called irresponsible. Someone who needs government assistance is treated like a parasite. The same society that allows billionaires to dodge taxes will lecture the working class about personal responsibility. This is not accidental. The system needs the poor to feel ashamed, because shame keeps people quiet. If you believe your struggle is your fault, you won't question the hierarchy that benefits others. You'll blame yourself, work harder, keep your head down, and even praise the very people crushing you. Nietzsche saw this as a form of slave morality. The oppressed internalize the values of the oppressor and consent to their own subjugation. They start to believe that suffering is punishment for weakness and that wealth must be a sign of divine favor. Eventually, the poor turn on each other instead of looking up at the true source of their suffering. We mock the homeless, despise the beggar, feel disgust for the addict, while celebrating grotesque displays of luxury on magazine covers. Look at how society treats a rich man who destroys communities through financial schemes. He's invited to conferences, praised for his vision, but a desperate person who steals groceries to feed their children? We call them criminal, dangerous, immoral. One destroys lives at scale and becomes a celebrity. The other breaks a minor law just to live and is treated like a stain on civilization. This manufactured moral code does more than justify inequality. It actively protects it. It teaches the masses to police themselves, to enforce the hierarchy from below. And the terrifying part? Most people don't even realize they've been recruited into guarding the fortress that excludes them. The rich don't need to oppress you with force if they can get you to believe that your suffering is your own fault, that your poverty is proof that you deserve to be at the bottom. But the moment that illusion collapses, something dangerous happens. You start to question all of it. You stop feeling ashamed of where you are. You start feeling angry, not with petty jealousy, but with a righteous clarity. I have been lied to about what is good, about what is worthy, about who I am allowed to be. And that leads to the real question. Once you see this, a bitter clarity dawns. We've been praising the wrong gods. We've worshipped wealth as though it is evidence of virtue. We've equated status with goodness. And in doing so, we've allowed the most destructive individuals to become the moral leaders of our time. Rebellion becomes a product. The system sells revolution back to us. Herbert Marcuse in Consumer Society. If morality has been weaponized to keep you small, what new code will you live by? One that does not bow to the wealthy, but restores dignity to the human being. You walk into a clothing store and see a t-shirt with Che Guevara's face on it, the symbol of anti-capitalist revolution, now mass-produced and sold for $40 by a global corporation. Or you see a massive tech brand using phrases like think different, break the system, disrupt, while it quietly monopolizes the very system it claims to rebel against. There's an eerie irony to it. Even the spirit of rebellion is something the rich have learned how to package, market, and profit from. Here's why this is so effective. People feel a deep hunger to express dissatisfaction with the system, to feel like they're rejecting it. But instead of actually dismantling or threatening power, we're offered a safer substitute. Buy the t-shirt, post the angry tweet, use the activist branding. It gives us the feeling of resistance while leaving everything exactly the same. Herbert Marcuse, a philosopher of the 20th century, warned about this long before it became obvious. He argued that modern consumer culture doesn't simply crush dissent through force. It absorbs it. It takes the symbols of resistance and turns them into trendy aesthetics. A revolutionary anthem becomes a Super Bowl commercial. A protest slogan becomes a corporate hashtag campaign. Every act of dissent becomes another marketing opportunity. Marcuse called this repressive sublimation. The system allows us to express our anger, our sexual energy, our frustrations, but in forms that no longer have teeth. Instead of starting a movement, we stream a documentary. Instead of overthrowing a corrupt institution, we buy a sticker that says resist. The energy that could change society is siphoned off into consumerism, leaving us pacified, distracted, and weirdly proud of our own rebellion, even though it's being sold to us by the very powers we claim to reject. Think about how capitalism even sells the idea of dropping out of capitalism. We pay to go on meditation retreats to escape the stress inflicted by the economic machinery. We buy minimalist lifestyle books that promise freedom from consumerism, by buying more products. Self-care becomes just another industry, monetizing the burnout caused by the system. This isn't freedom, it's a feedback loop. And here's the darker implication. The elite don't need to censor rebellion anymore. They just turn it into a brand. Once something becomes fashionable, the revolutionary message is sterilized. It's no longer threatening, it's profitable. Even those who genuinely want change unknowingly participate in the performance, believing they're rebelling, when in reality, they're fueling the system even more. So what do? You begin to see that real rebellion isn't loud or trendy. It's quiet, disciplined, often inconvenient. It means building something that can't be co-opted, real solidarity, real withdrawal of obedience, real alternative spaces. It means realizing that changing your wallpaper doesn't change the structure of the house. The real revolutionary act is not to wear the symbol, it's to refuse the game entirely. But once you realize this mechanism, it becomes almost surreal to witness. You watch people proudly wear symbols of protest, yet still worship celebrity wealth. You see anti-establishment slogans manufactured by multi-billion-dollar corporations. You start to understand that the system doesn't fear your outrage, it feeds on it, as long as it stays within the boundaries of consumption. And that brings us to the final, most uncomfortable truth. Even our desire for freedom is being sold back to us, unless we choose to step outside the transaction itself. If the system profits from your anger, your rebellion, even your pain, what would it look like to act in a way that it cannot monetize? So ask yourself,